call to order this presentation by the legislative auditor. One of the reports that are made of the constitutional officers on a rotating basis. I hope you hear me. The mic is on. On a regular schedule that involves a 3-year period. We'll begin then. Auditor Randall, did you have any preliminary comments you wanted to make before I turn to Ms. Lyson?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. For the record, my name is Judy Randall, Legislative Auditor. I want to first thank you for being here today to hear our release of performance audit of the Governor's Office and the Office of the Governor and Lieutenant Governor. I just wanted to remind all of you that we are the auditor of the constitutional offices, and we are on a regular pattern of auditing them every 4 years, typically. You will notice that this one comes 3 years later. We worked with the governor's office to change the timing of it so that they do not receive an audit in the year when there is a statewide election on the ballot. Or statewide office on the ballot. So this is our standard performance audit, a full scope audit of a constitutional office. And I would like to turn to Deputy Legislative Auditor Lori Lyson to get into the details of our findings and recommendations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Lyson.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. For the record, my name is...
Let's see, we need to halt for a second till we not have dual mics. Representative Guam.
Leaving.
Everything's okay now. Okay, Ms. Lyson.
Again, thank you, Madam Chair and members. For the record, my name is Lori Lyson. I'm the Deputy Legislative Auditor for the Financial Audit Division. And before I proceed, I would like to acknowledge the audit team, the audit director who oversaw this audit, Heather Rodriguez, and then our auditors, Lisa Makinen, Sheena Kurth, and Alec Mickelson.
Ms. Lyson, I neglected to take the roll to determine a quorum. Would you take the roll, please?
Senator Rest.
Present.
Representative Anderson. Representative Anderson.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yep.
Senator Barr.
Here.
Senator Dibble. Senator Drazkowski. Representative Greenman. Representative Hansen.
Here.
Representative Jacob.
Here.
Senator Curran.
Here.
Representative Lee.
Lee, present.
Representative Quam.
Present.
And Senator Zhang. Senator Zhang. We do have a quorum. That completes the roll.
Thank you very much. Quorum has been established. Ms. Lyson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we conducted an audit of the Governor and Lieutenant Governor's office as part of our recurring audits of the constitutional offices. Each time we audit a constitutional office, we do what we call a full scope audit. And that's really looking at the day-to-day operations of the office. That includes receipts, inventory, and non-payroll and payroll expenditures. The objectives of this audit were to determine whether the office of the Governor and Lieutenant Governor complied with the criteria that we tested and whether they resolved prior audit findings. Our scope was July 1st of 2022 through December 31st of 2024. During our audit scope, the office received $22.3 million in appropriations and $5.3 million in receipts. Those receipts are primarily coming from services that the governor's office provides to other state agencies. And then you can see here that a majority of their expenditures, 84% or 19.8 million, it goes to payroll. The audit areas that we tested were inventory, payroll expenditures, non-payroll expenditures, and receipts. So our overall conclusion is that the office generally did not comply with the criteria we tested because of internal control deficiencies, and our audit resulted in 12 findings. We last audited the office in 2022, and the report contained 6 findings. We followed up on the five findings that were still relevant and found that the office did not fully resolve 4 of those 5 findings. Our testing uncovered issues in all areas of financial operations, and again, those areas include receipts, inventory, non-payroll expenditures, and payroll expenditures. The issues we found and the cost for those issues were pervasive, and they created an opportunity for waste and for fraud. So we're going to focus on those findings we believe that are most concerning, but really the cause for the findings that I'm not going to discuss today are very similar in nature. So for this first finding, it's really foundational in understanding what may have contributed to the other findings that I'm going to discuss. The office lacked segregation of duties over its financial operations. The internal control standards state the importance of separating control activities related to the authority, to the custody, and the accounting of operations. At the governor's office, we found that the office coordinator was responsible for purchasing goods and services, receiving goods and services, processing vendor payments for those goods and services, and then all aspects of inventory. That includes tracking and disposing of assets, conducting physical inventories, monitoring compliance with the office's policy, and ensuring adequate internal controls over inventory. So what this means is that that individual can purchase an item, they can receive that item, they can pay for that item, then they will enter that item into inventory, and they can subsequently go ahead and remove that item from the inventory, all without the oversight of anyone else. So why this is important is that segregating duties helps to prevent things such as fraud. And by not maintaining adequate separation of duties, it significantly increases the risk that assets will be misappropriated without detection. And then there's also less opportunity for the office to detect noncompliance. Our recommendation here is that they segregate the incompatible duties, or if they're not able to segregate all duties, then they should mitigate that risk by developing other internal controls. And that can be as simple as just another level of supervisory review. So then on these next slides, I'm going to talk about 3 non-payroll expenditure issues related to late payments, inaccurate payments, and a lack of documentation to support expenditures. And although not all amounts discussed on these next slides may seem material or significant, the concern here is the frequency of the issues, the lack of segregation, and then that lack of oversight. So this first non-payroll issue we found is that the office did not always pay vendors, or frequently paid vendors late. Minnesota statutes require that state agencies pay vendors within 30 days of receiving an invoice for goods and services. And what we found is that they were frequently paid late in 3 areas that we tested. So for purchasing card statements, the governor's office paid 29 of 30 purchasing card statements late. These balances continue to roll forward from month to month. So during our audit scope, there was only 1 month where the statement was paid in its total amount. Otherwise, the balances just continued throughout our audit scope. And then for recurring expenditures, that is things such as rent, IT services, cable, phone. The governor's office paid 92 of 208 invoices late, and those payments ranged from 1 day to 359 days late, averaging 31 days late. And then for that final area, that's just various goods and services that they purchased. The office paid 23 of 41 invoices late. Those late payments range from 3 to 128 days late, averaging 34 days late. So why is this important? As a result of late payments, the office is subject to late fees and reactivation fees. And during the scope of our audit, the office paid over 1,000 in reactivation and late fees. And I'll just note here, not all vendors charge late fees. And then also the office did not maximize the prompt payment rebates that are offered by the purchasing card vendor. So our recommendation here is that the office should pay its vendors on time and they should strengthen internal controls. Another non-payroll issue we found was that the office issued inaccurate payments. So internal control standards require internal controls to ensure that payments are processed accurately. We found that employee reimbursements and vendor payments were frequently inaccurate. So for employee reimbursements, we found that for 14 of 40 employee expense reimbursements we tested, they contained errors that led to inaccurate payments. These errors include miscalculated miles, claiming ineligible meals, math errors, and then we also found that requests for reimbursements did not always match the payments that were made. So in total, 7 reimbursements were overpaid by $135 and 4 were underpaid by $120. And then for the vendor payments, we tested, we found that 2 of 25 state airplane payments, so that's the use of the state airplane, were for flights that the office had already previously paid for. So that resulted in an overpayment of $7,400. Our recommendation here is that the office should resolve those inaccurate payments and then they should strengthen internal controls. And then the last non-payroll issue that we found was that the office did not have documentation to support all expenditures. What is required here is state policy, which the office follows, and then the state's own policy requires documentation for such things as business travel, purchasing card use, and evidence of competitive solicitations. And then those internal control standards, they also direct management to design controls to ensure that transactions are appropriately documented. So what we found is that vendor payments, employee reimbursements, and purchasing card transactions were frequently unsupported by that required documentation. So for vendor payments, we found 40 of 41 of the payments that we tested did not include all required documentation, such as evidence that the goods and services were received, evidence of that competitive solicitation, and then for one sample, the office did not have any documentation. And then for those employee reimbursements, 16 of 40 reimbursements did not include all required documentation. Most of the missing documentation was pre-approvals for travel exceeding 35 miles, and then also authorization forms for travel outside of the state. And then for the area of purchasing cards, 18 of 49 statements were missing supporting documentation. 7 statements had no support, 8 statements were missing some receipts, and 4 statements were missing itemized receipts. So why does this matter? Without documentation, we could not determine if the expenditures were properly authorized, whether they were appropriate, and whether they were accurate. Our recommendations here are that the office obtain and retain the required documentation and that they strengthen internal controls. This last area I'm going to cover is receipts. And here we found that the office did not effectively manage its receipts. So for events held at the governor's office, the statutes required that the office recover the cost of events. However, the office did not collect approximately $12,000 for 7 of 9 of those events held at the governor's residence. These were primarily for non-state entities. Additionally, we found that the office did not fully process 4 deposits totaling over $3,000 in the state's accounting system. This resulted in a variance between the cash balance at the bank and the accounting system. So the bank is going to show more than what is in the state's accounting system. Then we also found that there was no evidence that the office had deposited $170 in donations that it collected from press events that were held at the governor's residence. And then finally, we saw that the office did not have documentation to support all amounts that it billed or deposited. So for instance, here we found that there was no documentation to support about 11,000 of 16,000 it charged to 2 state entities for events held at the governor's residence. And then there was no documentation to support 4 deposits totaling $5,000. So why is this important? Without adequate internal controls, the office is at risk of theft and not collecting funds that it is due. And then without adequate records, the office does not have accurate information regarding its budget or their financial obligations. So here what we're recommending is that the office should ensure that it manages its receipts as required by state law and office policy, and they should strengthen internal controls over its receipt processes. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take questions from members about the report. We again, first of all, I'm thanking you for this report over the 3 years. And I think all of us noticed that although, excuse me, although the dollar amounts are not necessarily significant or material as expenses and receipts are noticed. The pattern of inattention to the protocols that define the internal controls and segregation of duties is appalling. And that not only occurred during the last year, but was certainly present throughout this 3-year period that was being evaluated. It appears that training people in the office, the person, I'm not sure exactly who was the oversight person. It certainly wasn't the governor or the lieutenant governor. They don't sign receipts. They don't, do invoices themselves. But it's a staff function that was not being met. Over and over again, it looks like part of the recommendations in my mind are those of lack of training in how to do things. And the governor's and lieutenant governor's office is not what I would call a small agency. We have a number of, or at least some agencies that have maybe only 3 people in them. And there are challenges in those agencies, particularly for segregation of duties. You have somebody ordering something, somebody receiving something, and somebody paying for it. And unless there's a counter signature that acknowledges that the 2 out of the 3 people in the office are in accordance with the documents. What I also found troubling was a lack of attention to retention of receipts. Over and over again, that was treated with maybe good intentions, but a lack of attention that in the governor's office and his staff is simply not acceptable. And I'm hoping that in their response that they are first of all training their employees who are going to have this responsibility, and then holding them holding them accountable. I'll have further comments later, but that's my beginning ones. Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And looking at on 33 and 34, the unsupported expenditures, and you've got like three different categories. The one that is vendor payments, it's 98% do not have documentation. And then the other two are more related to employees and, internal working. And those, at least over 60% did have documentation. So is there a difference between how they handled that? Is one group doing a better job, or is it just systematic for vendor interaction? Thank you.
Slicen.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Quam. I think that the audit team found this throughout the audit scope and throughout all different types of transactions. So it wasn't like we saw one group doing something different. And if you recall, it's really one employee that is processing these payments too. So I think it just depended on, what was available and what was submitted for payment.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just looking at it, the difference between 98% and, not being, and the employees that are submitting the expenditure reimbursements and the purchase card statements, the majority of those are being done. So it appears to be the outside entities, the vendors are not supplying the documentation, and it's not being caught. So I think there might be some things gained on that end of processes because we've seen that in other departments. But I am glad to see that when the employers are doing the expenses, for trips and et cetera, that most of those are being documented. I just noticing the difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Jacob.
Thank you, Chair Rest. So as I'm kind of going along, adding up the numbers here, at first blush, it doesn't seem like these are very big numbers and it's not a huge red flag, but as things went along, I kind of accumulated, from what I could tell, roughly $30,000, I'd say, of inconsistencies. Do you have a specific number of inconsistencies in this report?
Ms. Lyson or Ms. Randall?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Jacob. In the report, we don't have, a total that talks about the dollar value of the different types of issues. We do have additional information in our work papers, if that can be of help.
Representative Jacob.
Thank you, Chair Rest. Has there been any offer for restitution of the amount of money that has been determined to, I'll just call it, be involved in the inconsistencies at this point?
Ms. Lyson.
Sorry. Okay. Madam Chair and Representative Jacob, I'm sorry. Can you repeat your question for me?
With respect to,
Representative Jacob.
thank you, Chair Rest. With respect to the amount of inconsistencies that we found so far, has there been any offer of restitution to make that right with the taxpayer?
Ms. Lyson.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Jacob. That would be a question that I would ask the governor's office.
Representative Jacob.
Madam.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Auditor Randall.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Jacob. I will note that we did not see evidence of wrongdoing. What we did see was evidence of lax controls, right? But restitution would typically come into place when things were paid in error and paid, fraudulently or for things they did not receive. We did not see evidence of that. We have had numerous conversations with the governor's office to go back and, reclaim payments that were due that hadn't been made, for example, or to reach out to employees that maybe were overpaid and recover those funds. And my understanding is the letter in the back of the report outlines the actions that the governor's office has taken to either get paid the payments they are due or to recover the funds that they overpaid employees.
I found it interesting, I'll come back to you, Representative Jacob, that the mistakes went the other way as well. That there were two instances of the governor's office using the state plane, and they paid the invoice, and then they received a corrected invoice, and they paid that as well. And that the Department of Transportation has noted that and far from the governor's office doing it, the Department of Transportation has restored that credit to the governor's office for the double payment. That does not excuse, in my mind, the lack of attention to the action itself. The person who was responsible for paying that bill should have noticed immediately when they received a corrected invoice that the bill contacted the Department of Transportation and said, this bill has already been paid. Why are we receiving a second invoice? And apparently that was not done. Representative Jacobs, you want to continue, and then I'll call on Representative Greenman and then Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Chair Rest. I'll just have probably one follow-up question, but I guess what's extremely alarming, 4 out of the 5 previous findings not followed. So it's pervasive and ongoing. Certainly, and I understand that sometimes the inconsistencies would go in either direction. So it might feel like, oh, those were innocent mistakes. But for me, as someone representing my constituents, this is the office that's in charge of the whole state, essentially. And if these kind of problems are happening at this level, that's what opens the door on a bigger level for the whole state. So it is very concerning. So I guess my last question then would be, is there a need for some type of legislation to bring this matter so that it doesn't continue and be ongoing as it is?
Ms. Lyson?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Jacob. I think what exists, and I've talked about this in other hearings, is the foundation of internal controls is there. There is policies, there is procedures. The governor's office has that in existence. The state of Minnesota has that in existence. And it's really just truly about the implementation of those controls. It's really making sure that they're implementing them and that there is oversight over that. So for instance, we have this one employee who is responsible for all of these things, right? From purchasing all the way through inventorying. There should be oversight over that. There should be somebody else looking over that person's shoulders and saying, okay, yep, that's accurate. You did what you were supposed to do. So I don't think it comes back to the legislature. I really think it just comes to the governor's office, who was receptive of our audit and our findings and has already started making progress on addressing those findings. But again, I'll just say that foundation is there and it just needs to be implemented and continued and to be oversight over these processes.
Last.
Certainly,
you.
Representative Jacob.
Thank you, Chair. So I guess I just sum that up by saying we need to find someone other than the fox to guard the hen house.
Thank you, Representative Jacob. I would comment that these kinds of audits are done of other constitutional offices. We do, Senator Barr chairs the Financial Audit Subcommittee, and various state agencies undergo financial audits, and they themselves are independent of the audits that are conducted by conducted on the governor's office itself. Representative Greenman. And I neglected to indicate at the beginning that Representative Claiborne has also joined us. She is the co-chair of the House State and Local Government, and is invited to participate as she sees fit. Representative Greenman.
Excuse me. Thank you, Senator Rest, and I appreciate your comments. I actually just have some clarification questions because I think it is important. This is a thorough and probing audit, and I appreciate that and the findings. And I do think the sloppy documentation and paperwork you have well documented. Talking about the inadequate segregation of duties, because you made reference to what it could be, but you actually looked at this office. And I just want to make sure that we're clear, given the thorough audit you did. I didn't hear you say that you found the problem, the reason that we would separate those, and I think providing that guidance and proactive work on that is really important. But the reason that we worry about it is an actual issue of misuse and that kind of issue. And you didn't find that problem when you did your audit. Is that right?
Ms. Lyson.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Greenman. That is correct. Mine was just purely an example of what can happen when you don't segregate those duties, but we didn't see any evidence of any type of fraud or misuse of funds.
Ms. License, however, if they aren't keeping receipts, there's nothing to check. So we need to keep that in mind too. They really do need to keep their receipts, and I'm hoping, I have not yet read their response, but that they have applied more rigor to making sure that they're keeping the receipts. So when the audit comes up again, that everything would be in order, no matter what the cost was, and whether it was nor the nature of the receipt, whether it was for inventory or payroll or otherwise. Representative Greenman, did you have a follow-up?
Thank you, Senator Rest, Chair Rest. Appreciate that. I guess what I would say, because I think this particular issue is of a position, and I hear you saying that separating those duties is just an additional check. If we were talking about finding that kind of misuse or malfeasance, it would be a different conversation about a personnel issue. And I, again, just want to make sure that we're clear, because I think it leads to what are the next steps. And I'm interested in hearing what the governor's office has been doing in terms of responding to and working on these pieces. I definitely believe we should build the infrastructure in all of our agencies, and we should make sure that we have the resources to do that, to provide all of those internal controls and those checks. But for this one, you used an example of the problems it could create. And I think it's really important to, you did a thorough audit to actually talk about the findings of those audit. So thank you, Chair Rest.
Thank you, Representative Greenman. Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm looking on page 27, the finding of property management and the assets. And it says that this asset tracking list that people were or were not aware of, but there were, and it seems like it was an old list, and it talks about items and assets. Are those, and that they couldn't find them or whatever, are those cell phones, computers, or are they like a coffee machine? What are they?
Ms. Lyson.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Hanson. So the office was able to provide us one list that was outside of the state's accounting system, and that was for like cell phones. And then the list that was in the state's accounting system, most state entities, all state entities are required to track their capital assets in the state's accounting system. They can use that to track other things as well, but that is the purpose of it. They could use their own kind of form of tracking. They could use the state's accounting system. So items that you would normally see in the state's accounting system are usually items that are over $30,000. So it would be, I don't recall exactly what the governor's office had in their inventory list, but it would be things that are of more significant cost. It could be some software, it could be servers, it could be a vehicle, it could be artwork, it could be really anything that is over 30,000.
Representative Hanson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I was going to ask, can they tell if the cell phones are deactivated or the computers are, but if it's larger than 30K, I think that might be something for a follow-up. Madam Chair, another question if I can.
Of course.
Um,
Representative Hanson?
So I'm trying to, I always like the chronology of when something stops and when does it start. So we had the 22 audit, and did that period that was reviewed, did that end like January 1 of 22? And then this new audit started on January 2, or did it start just to kind of see, it looks like there was the summer of 22, we had the audit. So I'm trying to determine, did we get the audit that reviewed the past, and then we have a period in the new audit where there could have been the corrective action? So if you could help me with the chronology.
Ms. Lyson?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Hanson. So you're correct. The last audit ended in actually 2021, the calendar year. And then we do have a moment of time where there is neither audit covered the scope. So there's that beginning of January through June of 2022. So when we're looking at prior audit findings and we're bringing those into the current audit, we're looking to see that those issues have been resolved. So we are going to stretch back into that prior scope and look at that gap, between the two audits too, to see if policies have been corrected, if money has been recouped. So we will include that within that audit. And then the current audit, the new findings that we see are covering that period that we talked about, July 2022 through December of 2024. So anytime that we're going to look at a prior audit finding, we're going to scope it back and make sure we're covering the entirety to understand that if processes or procedures have changed, because we do want to give credit to the state entity to make sure that we're acknowledging that.
Representative Hanson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And then finally, I'm thinking way back to when I was a MAPE employee and also a middle management supervisor. And you have a variety of tools working. If I was sloppy on my timesheet, that I could maybe be sent to a class, or there'd be corrective action, some type of coaching, like fill it out on, every day or something. But that's a long time ago. But I'm trying to put myself in a position of folks who are currently in state service, whether they're AFSCME, MAPE, or any of the other bargaining units, and how are the tools available to the governor's office the same? Like if there were classes or coaching or type of training, are those available to folks in the governor's office?
Ms. Lyson?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Hanson. So yes, we know that Minnesota Management and Budget definitely is available to answer questions and to provide guidance. And they actually do submit regular guidance via email for employees. And there's a lot of resources online. And then also the governor's office utilizes SMART. I do not know what SMART stands for right now, but it's for small entities in state government, and they help provide kind of payroll and HR services. They don't necessarily do transactional items for the governor's office, but they do some kind of budgetary and some other things, but they're also available. And then in this instance for payroll in particular, it's actually a non-governor employee who is responsible for, they work full-time for the governor's office, but they're not a governor's office employee. But they have knowledge of payroll, and they also can help provide guidance. So I would say that the governor's office has just as many resources as anyone else in state government. And I will say those bargaining agreements are confusing at times, and there's a lot of different ones and they don't all say the same thing. So yeah, it's good to know that there's services out there and entities that can help out employees and help out staff too in helping to process payroll as well.
And Ms. Lyson and Representative Hanson, on page 1 of the report, there's a citation of the statutes that it is indeed a requirement of MMB to review the audit reports and to help agencies in considering the governor and lieutenant governor's office, an agency, to correct internal control problems noted in those reports. And so that would have then led to, one would think and hope, additional training or training at all of how to meet internal control protocols. Senator, Senator Coran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When we look at, I think Senator Rusty did a great job at none of the numbers stand out, but simple controls. Maybe in the first year of an administration taking over, there's a lot. And you won't be able to dot every I and cross every T, but this is not the first year for the office. And when we go through the list, it seems inconsequential the dollars we deal with here, but when you look at some of the issues, we talk about use of airplanes, and we've got a balance between official duties and campaign duties and all of those. The governor and all of us serve in a dual capacity to remove any doubt of any impropriety. When you go through some of the purchases, the vendor payments look pretty clear, right? Those are people we do buying material, buying services. But I've been in this world and for a while, and when you look at employee reimbursements, the easiest corrective way to take care of that doesn't have to be led by too many people. Just you don't pay any reimbursement without a receipt. And Ms. Lysing, do we have? I don't know. Is there anything prohibiting them from withholding payments on those expenditure reimbursements without receipt?
Ms. Lyson?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Russ. I mean, I think at any time you can withhold processing those reimbursements until you receive all required documentation and approval. Ultimately, you end up having to pay it, but you can always withhold it and delay it until you have what you need to process.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Coran.
Yeah, and I agree, and it's correct. The quickest way to motivate the person who is waiting for that reimbursement. But the lack of having the receipts on both the employee and the purchasing cards statements to me is problematic. I think Representative Greenman talked about, we can't find any misuse, but without any evidence, we can't prove it either way. And in our world, these are the really simple transactions. It's easy. We have a relationship with everybody, and we should take care of those. It's just basic things to remove any doubt, either real or perceived, of doubt, and then instill confidence in our voters. But when you get to the other pieces of, simple things on the purchasing card, thus the reason for purchasing cards, I think in the report it says you get about $6,000 in annual reimbursements. You get a rebate, a kickback for managing your own card within the card networks. But in this, we missed $1,000 of rebates that they chose not to, or their ineffectiveness limited us, or we didn't receive $1,000. It's 16% of it. We should be doing this. It literally is the sole purpose for the purchase cards. And the other reason is for the transactional or the verifiable transaction of the receipt for multiple channels through the card networks. It's really simple. The one that gives me the most concern is, again, dollars aren't spectacular, but the use of the mansion, I think you said only for a period of, maybe you didn't say it in this, but in the report and in our conversations in a preview, is from August 22nd to January 23rd, or August 2022 to January of 2023, of the 9 events that were held at the mansion, didn't recover $12,000. 7 of them we didn't collect anything on. It sounds like you guys contacted them. It sounds like they may have gone out and corrected that, but we don't appear to have any contracts with somebody who utilizes the mansion. Ms. Lysing, do we have any contracts that we could find?
Ms. Lyson, are there contracts with regard to the use of the governor's residence? And I would add further to Senator Coran's question, who signed them? Who is the responsible person signing the contract on behalf of, I'm supposing, the governor's residence council is the entity that supposedly is it's the host and responsible for providing a bill to the user of the residence for whatever purpose, and that the residence council has also determined that it is an acceptable use of the residence in terms of its policies.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Who signs the contracts?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Cran. There were agreements for the use of the residence. And the individuals who signed them are at the governor's residence. Specifically, I don't know that we have specific names of individuals or like the role. I don't know if that we have the position of the individual who signs them, but it is somebody at the governor's residence that signs those agreements.
Madam Chair, follow.
Senator Coran.
And so with that, I mean, I think it sounds like, I believe you did go out and contact them. And of the 7 that were not, where no collections of the $12,000 occurred at the time of the audit, 5 of them are related to either the governor or the lieutenant governor campaign activities.
Right.
And so those are the things that draw a little suspicion. We're not even talking about the value of the environment of what is that, in a cash monetary value relative to any other venue. But to then not have gone out and collected and do the due diligence to make the collection effort on those and or get that payment up front, that's where that can lead to a lack of trust from our citizens, and certainly from the legislative process that we get it, it's politics. The governor's mansion's available, just pay the fair share. But to have 7 of 9 just kind of fall to the wayside and maybe only be done because we did an audit, and this audit, or at least from this period, it covered a pretty small period. And then the other donations, right? How do you miss $170 donations going in? No documentation for 11,000 of $16,000 in event revenue. And then another $5,000 of unknown deposit with no documentation. So we need to know those things, especially in the world we play. It's a dual role. We have to clarify those things for everything we do, so our citizens know constituency service, legitimate activities relative to campaign activities. And sometimes they look like they blend, but from a transactional perspective, I think those rules are pretty clear. And so every single one should require receipt, and they just need to do better. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Coran. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Senator Russ. I think it's important to point out, we had a year or 2 ago, we had the Attorney General and with his audit, and it was the absolute opposite of this. That audit was, clean. He should be commended. This is probably the worst audit I've seen of a constitutional office. And I mean, it's shocking. It's shocking. We have overpayments. We have no documentation. You've all talked about all the different things, but it's just incredibly poor financial management. And we need this to turn around, because the citizens, have lost faith in government, and it's just wrong. And it's because of things like this, where you have, just obviously an entity, whoever's running the governor's office doesn't care about following these procedures, basic procedures that need to be followed. So I just want to point that out, and just it's horrible. It's also really sad. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Anderson. Representative Claiborne.
Thank you, Senator Rust, and Madam Chair. My comments I'll keep really brief. One, I just want to thank you for the briefing that you gave me on the report. And I haven't had a chance to fully digest the report as I just received it this morning. But one of the things that I would like to ask you about in doing these reports, and I've said this to you before, it is really important for me, and I think for the public as a whole, to have like a real basis, foundational information behind the report that I don't see. So for example, in your presentation this morning, we have the funding and expenditures slide, which is number 3, right? Which I really appreciate seeing. So we can see if we just quickly do the math, we're talking about an office that receives about $27 million in receipts, right? But then on the expenditure side, we get percentages. So I had to quickly do the back of the envelope math to see that we're talking about total expenditures of an office of over $4 million, $4.5 million quickly, if these percentages are correct for non-payroll, right? And then we hear Representative Jacobs talking about the report is talking about maybe $30,000 of things that were maybe not accurate. And you and I talked about the fact that these are low dollar infractions, right? And they're kind of isolated infractions, if my understanding of our conversation is correct. Now, I really appreciate the work that was done to enhance internal controls. I'm a firm believer that internal controls are key. And while at this time there was no employee in the office of the governor who acted in bad faith or, did a fraudulent activity, I can understand your concern about opening a door to a bad actor. And I agree with that 100%. And so I'm very appreciative of that. So when I think it's helpful for the public when reading these reports to have that foundational basis. So for an example, you talk about vendor payments late, right? And you said from 1 day to 359 days or whatever the second number was. I keep wanting to say 365, but I don't think that's the number you use. So when you average that, you get a picture of 34 days maybe, right? But what's the median, right? We measure so many things in median so that we know what's above, what's below, how many are above, how many are below. So we take out those outliers in the averages and we have a better context of what that might look like. So when it just makes it easier for somebody like me to read, right? When I have that foundational information. But I am really pleased to see in the back of the report that so many of the things have been corrected. And I'm really happy to see that you have identified opportunities for improvement, right? Opportunities for training and things like that. So I just want to thank you for your work. And those are my comments. Thank you.
I would, Ms. Lyson, I would also point out that when researchers are looking at data to be able to make some sort of judgment about what's in front of them, they often would take what you've done with that 359 days late payment, almost a year, and they would eliminate that from their calculation to come down to what was really the ongoing late payment average. And that's done so that there isn't some real outlier in what is actually going on. And that's not just done in looking at the operation of an office. quite frankly, it's done when we're looking at formulas for local government aid. We observe, well, wait a minute, this city, what happened here with regard to it getting an exorbitant, look like exorbitant payment for something that can be explained, but kind of offline. And that we have to be very careful about making general statements about averages when we when we include every outlier. And I think that's one of the things that Representative Claiborne is looking at, that 300, for example, that 359-day payment, if that was eliminated, would that have made the average late payment look more like 25 or 26 days? When according to their protocols, 30 days is what is permissible without something notable being mentioned about it. Would you care to comment on that?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Oh,
Or Auditor Randall, and also a direct response to Representative Claiborne's point.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Claiborne. Thank you for the comments in terms of, how much information to present. I think that's always something we balance. We, of course, have the work papers and all the details for those who want more information. Oftentimes we hear we have too much information and just give me the bottom line. So trying to straddle that, but we hear what you're saying. I did want to make a couple of comments related to, the average of how many days past due. And we do have, I have it in front of me, kind of more granular. But it strikes me as a similar conversation as, it's a small dollar value. And so maybe it's not that big of a deal because, it's a small dollar value. If it's only 5 days late, it doesn't matter as much as if it's 30 days late or, 100 days late. And I guess as auditors, I would disagree with that premise because the point is it's an internal control, right? There's a requirement to have these paid on time. There are penalties or potential penalties if they're not. And so sure, we can take out the 359. I can tell you there were others that were 184 days late, 179 days late, 150 days late, et cetera. But to me, it's not unimportant to talk about that, but what the really important thing here is that the internal controls were lacking and allowed the late payments to happen. I also just wanted to level set on what we mean when something is 30 days late. We allow, a 30-day window to be paid. And then on that 31st day, or whatever the invoice says, it needs to be paid within 30 days, let's say. The 31st day is the first day it's late in our calculations. So when we say something is 30 days late, it's actually, 60 days after it was invoiced or something. So we tried really hard to be conservative in how we measured it. I definitely take the point on median, and I've written it down actually here, and I think that is something we will definitely pay attention to going forward. But I just wanted to kind of say, again, we're talking about the amount of days or the amount of dollars. Sure, but the main thing we're concerned about here are the lack of internal controls that create an opportunity for something worse to happen. And that's what we look for, and that's what our auditors do in these audits. It's all about looking at compliance and internal controls. So thanks for letting me jump in. I don't know if Ms. Lyson had more. No, thank you.
Representative Jacob, or Representative Claiborne, Representative Jacob.
Thank you, Chair Rest. So I just want to follow up briefly here on some of the pieces Senator Cran was working on. On page 18, the paragraph reads, did not have documentation to support the $10,560 charged to 2 state agencies in November of 2022, which seems significant. That's the election month of the election year. And also in March for events held at the governor's office. Without documentation, we could not determine if the amount the office charged was accurate. But also without documentation, is there any way to prove that the taxpayers' dollars aren't being used for campaign purposes, specifically when it's on November of 2022 on a campaign year? Is there any way to prove that that money was not taxpayer dollars used for campaign purposes?
Ms. Lyson
Um,
or Ms. or Auditor Randall.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Jacob. I'll start by saying that the 10,560 was for state entities, and we do have documentation to know that it was state agencies that were renting the, or using the facility at that time. The non-state entities are on the first bullet under finding one, where it was 7 events. Sorry, I'm just trying to read it so I can see. 7 of 9, thank you, where we did not have the documentation, and we know those were for the non-state entities. So I just want to make sure we're clear that the $10,000, 10,560 it charged to state entities were state entities. So not as
Not
clearly,
campaign
right.
activities.
Yeah.
Representative Jacob.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, thank you so much for your work on this. I really appreciate it. And I just think as a committee as a whole, can't see where we'd expect anything different to be happening statewide than what's happening really at a microcosm here in the governor's office. So very disappointing.
Thank you. A number of years ago, there was a huge issue with, and I don't remember under which governor, seems to me happens under every governor in one agency or another, whether it's their office or another state agency. But it had to do with MMB's own approach to internal controls, and they were found very lacking. And I was chairing the Legislative Audit Commission at the time, and I had a big meeting with them, with the employees at MMB, along with the commissioners. And I talked to them about internal controls. You should be regarding them just like brushing your teeth. You wouldn't consider leaving your house in the morning without brushing your teeth. That's what an internal control is. It is automatic. It becomes part of your DNA. And if you go 5 or 6 days without brushing your teeth, people are definitely going to notice. And there was, following that, a big turnaround at MMB and its outreach to state agencies with regard to internal controls. And they started publishing and continue to do so an internal controls bulletin that they recommend to be reviewed in each of the state agencies. And that should certainly be a practice. If it's not now, if it's not in the past, it should be a practice that continues even in smaller agencies like the governor's office. MMB has been on top of that in sending out those internal controls bulletins, and they have the right to expect that they're being paid attention to. It should be an automatic response to a receipt, to caring for an asset, whether it's a capital asset or just a inventory item of paper goods, for example, employee reimbursements. Not having the receipts means, again, you can't check on anything. And it doesn't mean that there are lots of, not the dollar amounts, it is the discipline that is required under law with internal controls, that on segregation of duties, that that's what the taxpayers have a right to expect and count on in every single agency. And I'm hoping that is going to be, I haven't read, again, as I said, the response. We'll listen to that now for a few minutes. But it only takes discipline. You don't have to be a CPA in order to record an invoice or a receipt for payment, or making sure something's not been paid twice or hasn't been paid at all. And we have a right to expect more. So we're going to turn to the governor's response right now. We'll come back to you, Representative Claiborne, later. Welcome to the commission. If you would identify yourselves for the record. Who is going to speak first, or who is going to speak? And if you would direct your remarks to your written response, that would be helpful as well.
Certainly.
So welcome again, if you'd identify yourself.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the commission. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning. My name is Eric McConkey. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and Legislative Affairs in the Governor's Office. We'll shortly turn it over here to my colleague, Harry Fee, to go through our response letter, and we'll really kind of plan to go through each finding, because each finding is really important. But before we do that, I just want to thank Auditor Randall, her whole team on the OLA for the detailed, thorough work. All the findings are important. We're looking forward to having the conversation here today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mary Fee.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the commission. Ms. Fee, please identify yourself, and then we'll welcome your testimony.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Legislative Audit Commission. My name is Mary Fee. I'm the General Counsel and Deputy Chief of Staff to Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. Eric and I are here today, myself as the liaison to the auditor's office, and Eric as obviously the liaison to the legislature. And we really appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk through and provide comments on the OLA's performance review. Number one, I just first would like to echo the thanks to Auditor Randall and her whole team for a thorough, thoughtful, deeply professional and frankly really helpful review of our audit. And I'd also extend thanks to the commission for taking the time to have us here today and to let us walk through some of our findings. I think Senator Rest, Madam Chair, your comment on toothbrushing is really prescient, and then one I'm going to bring back to staff. I think that's a really helpful and thoughtful way to describe this, and does not paint us in a flattering light, but in an accurate one. And in this, my goal here is, not to be defensive and not to make any excuses, I think, for some of the findings, which, I think you are right to expect that the governor's office can and should do better. And that's something we are actively working towards. But I think also, if you would allow me, I'd like to walk through the letter that we appended to the back of the OLA's report. If you're in your book, I think it would be about page 40, although I'll note that the numbering stops.
We renumber the pages, but they are the last pages in the.
So near the end, because I think it'd be helpful to provide both some context for how things ended the way they did, and two, to just talk through the process improvements that we have made and continue to make in our office. This was a really detailed review and has resulted in our office to improving internal controls. I think to various commission members' points about training being kind of a key piece that is within our power to do better immediately, as well as strengthen processes around documentation, billing, receipts. And I also want to talk through some of just the strategic employment decisions we've made to just continue professionalizing the work of our office. So if you would allow me, I would just walk through, I'll be brief, but I also want to get into each one of these findings because I don't want to minimize any of them. And I think that the context is relevant here. So I would just start with finding number one, which has to do, and we've discussed this now a little bit, that the office did not adequately manage its receipts. And I think that, again, I would just say thank you to the auditor for walking through all of these things. I think she's right, and I think this is a place that we've got to do better. I would contextualize these errors, noting only that these really happen in a very limited scope of time, and frankly related to office staffing weaknesses that we had. And I think the key thing I would point to is that this is not an ongoing issue. This has not continued. This is not something that you continue to see throughout the rest of the audit. These were events in 2022, and I think one in very early 23. The second we became aware that there were issues here at all, the office sought payment immediately and kind of rectified the situation. But going forward, I think one of the reasons you haven't seen this happen again is both this professionalization of staffing in the office as well as improved training. That's something that we had in our control, we could do immediately, and we took action right away. I'd like to turn to finding number two. This has to do with office timesheets. And I think a little context here is worthwhile, mostly because prior to the helpful audit findings in 2022, our office was using hard copy timesheets. So you entered this into Excel, you printed it out, you walked around the office and you got your supervisor to sign off on it. You gave it to HR, who then manually entered this back into the system. And you can just kind of see all of the different places that could go awry. And so the auditor, I think, rightfully pointed this out in 22. And so we took steps to switch over to electronic timesheets. That's much more common across the rest of the enterprise, but had not been used by the governor's office at that point. And I think that has solved a lot of our problems, in no small part, Madam Chair, to your point, because it makes things automatic. It makes things automatic, and it just prevents casual errors, because the computer says, you haven't done XYZ thing. This doesn't work anymore. You can't keep going. What happened here was, frankly, we adopted the use of automatic timesheets. We set our systems based on what our sister agencies do, kind of taking our lead from there. And in the course of this audit, the auditor pointed out that, look, there are best practices you could do better as to who signs off when and what, and kind of that methodology. Our view had been that we were in line with other agencies, but we appreciated her findings and made changes. So we have taken steps to have our timesheet processes more in line with best practices than we had before. And we implemented those as soon as the auditor kind of flagged them for us. Finding 3 had to do with floating holiday and vacation leave payouts. This had to do with 3 employees in 2021 and 2022. And I want to go into the detail on this because I think now I've forgotten who raised it, but I think rightfully raised concerns that there are continuing findings from the prior audit. And I hear that, and again, not looking to minimize anything, but I think this context is relevant because there were unquestionably floating holiday and office payout issues. I think that functionally that was resolved and has been resolved for a number of years because of frankly the switch to electronic timesheets and the state payroll management system. So there isn't a question of this being an ongoing issue, that vacation leave payouts continue to be messed up, that that employees are getting paid out inaccurate amounts and that's continuing. That's not the case. The issue here is that these 3 errors from 21 and 22 were not corrected. And so the state had taken the position in good faith that it was not a good use, it was on the public's interest and was not a good use of resources to aggressively try and claw back and collect these overpayments from employees. And the reason for that is because the office felt like it was our mistake. Like this was, there's no question that the employees sought inaccurate payments or did anything wrong here. And I don't know that all of them were even aware that this had happened. The office felt like, well, this was our mistake. People have received this money. They're depending on it. They've spent this. It is unfair to them, who these people have done nothing wrong, and not in the public interest to spend a lot of resources going after this money. But the auditors team reasonably disagreed with that. And so as a result, we have in fact sent letters to each of these folks. Number 1, notifying them that the overpayment happened, and number 2, seeking repayment. So I again, not looking to minimize anything, but I want to contextualize this. This is not ongoing issues of employee overpayment problems. There was a difference of opinion about collection methods, and we have since adopted the OLA's recommendation. Finding 4 has to do with one employee's eligibility for paid parental leave. I would put this not in a similar category, I guess, to finding number 3. This is not, again, an ongoing issue where there continues to be lack of documentation for parental leave, or that this is an ongoing problem for the office. This is a problem that was raised in 2022, rightfully. There was an employee. And part of this probably goes to the size of our office. Unlike other offices with hundreds or thousands of employees, we have tens of employees. And so this person was known to the HR folks who processed the leave. And there's no question that this person was eligible for the leave, that the leave was right, it was accurate, it was the right amount of time, et cetera. But what the HR folks were supposed to do and did not do back in now I don't know if it's 21 or 22, was document that, yes, in fact, this person was full-time, that they met the other qualifications of paid leave, that in fact there was a baby, et cetera. And I think that was a finding in 2022. We accepted it, we fixed it. It has not been an ongoing issue. The reason that it appears in this report again is because there were 2 days of that leave that continued into this audit period. And the kind of original sin of the inaccurate or lack of documentation from the beginning of that leave, which was covered in audit number 1, was not remedied by the end of those last 2 days in audit period number 2. So I would say it's part and parcel of that issue, but again, it's a little bit different in my mind than a continuing issue or one where we rejected the auditor's view. It's just kind of a stub issue held over from the last audit. And again, no similar or repeat issues of that kind since that time. Finding number 5 had to do with retroactive pay adjustments for 7 employees. This is also just a finding that is kind of discrete and time limited. These were, as I mentioned, we switched over to electronic timesheets, which is, I think, a great improvement for our office, and something that I'm grateful to the OLA for suggesting and this office for implementing. In that transition from printed out Excel spreadsheets to electronic timesheets, folks, there was a learning curve both among people who were entering their time and the HR folks who were in charge of signing off on their time, and likely the supervisors too, which resulted in 7 employees who made some kind of mistake in their timesheet and received a retroactive pay adjustment. So all of these issues took place, as I understand it, within like a 2 or 3 month period, a number of years ago, in that time of transition. And so again, not looking to minimize this, the errors were real, and this is again not a continuing problem or something that the office is plagued by. This was kind of a time limited issue stemming from this transition. So, and I guess the other piece of this is then the office made a similar decision, rightly or wrongly, but I think in good faith, to say, again, these 7 people had, through no fault of their own, through errors of the office and of the HR system, received some amount of overpayment during this timesheet transition, and that it would be unfair to them, again, because they got paid, they were depending on this money, and themselves had no fault in the overpayment, to aggressively claw that back. That said, this is something that our office talked through with the auditor's team, and recognizing that there was a difference of opinion. That's the reason for the delay. Changed course and did send letters this last summer notifying folks of this overpayment and seeking recoupment. So I just want to contextualize that too. These are not continuing ongoing issues, and the delay, to the extent there was, resulted from a good faith difference of opinion that we have since changed course on to come into compliance with the auditor's findings. Number 6 had to do with required documentation supporting payroll and leave adjustments. So these are errors that happen in timesheets having to do with kind of the category of time you are recording. So if you are sick, but you record, you put down the sick code in your timesheet, but you should have put down the vacation code. Or you can imagine you had planned to be on vacation and in fact you got called back to the office because there's work to do, but your timesheet was already submitted. Now you've done something wrong and you need help to fix what you've put in the system. So in these cases, the employee would call HR, say, you know what, I messed this up. I put down sick, or I came back from vacation. I have recorded time in the wrong category. Can you help me recategorize this in the kind of HR system? There's no suggestion that was improper or wrong or inaccurate or problematic, but our HR folks should have done more written documentation than they did. So what happened is the employee would call and say, hey, can you do this? The HR would verify that that was accurate and would make the change. What we have done since talking to the auditor and going through these findings is improve that setup of documentation. So the HR folks, to the extent that that people make errors, and I think that is a place that people probably will continue, or the plans change or whatever. HR does a much better job of documenting, yes, this person on this day, someone called me, I checked with their supervisor and I made this change, just noting that in the system so that there's clarity about what happened and why. Finding 7 has to do with inventory and also these incompatible duties and the segregation of duties. So I'd like to talk about each one of those a little bit separately here. So first is the segregated duties piece that I think Auditor Randall rightfully emphasized in her presentation, and I'm grateful for that. To be honest, this happened in our office again because it is a small office. Being one person down makes a big difference for us, and it meant that one person takes on the whole load of responsibilities. And again, there isn't a suggestion that there was actual wrongdoing, but I think the auditor is right that that's the place we have to do better. And so as soon as the auditor's team flagged this for us, we did immediately, even without hiring staff or without doing anything else, figured out how to better distribute those responsibilities among the staff we do have in the office. And in the meantime, since then, we have brought on another finance person so that those things are even better distributed. There are now at least 2 folks who are just kind of more at the staff level who can manage these things on a day-to-day basis, in addition to kind of the leadership supervisor role who can sign off on all of these things. So, again, not looking to minimize any of this, and just wanting to note the realities of staffing in what is a relatively small office and with a relatively small operations team. But again, took steps that I think the day that the auditor raised these, because there's no question that this opens up risk that there's no need to be taken. The inventory piece, I can talk for a little bit. I think the key for the governor's office is that unlike other agencies, and you can imagine MnDOT being a great example, who have a fleet of snowplows and big expensive construction equipment and stuff that you could, drive away. And there's all of this stuff. The governor's office just actually doesn't have significant amounts of property. Not in that same way. We don't have a fleet of snowplows. And the property that we do have is sometimes, but not always, managed by other agencies. And I'm not looking to like pawn off responsibility here, but I just want to share that context because Minute manages some of the property used in the governor's office. Admin manages some of the property in the office and the residents, and so those responsibilities just are shared in a different way than they are at your average agency. But that said, this is a place that, again, we can do better, and that's in progress. And so I think the auditor noted, I think there's 2 podiums that, again, there's no question they're not accounted for, but they're not on the formal inventory in the way they should be. And so that's something we're working on as we speak, which should be done in the next couple of weeks, and plan to be in compliance there very shortly. Finding 8 is this late payment question. And, this is a place that I just completely agree with the auditor and their findings. Like, this is a place that the governor's office should not be taking so long to make late payments. I don't think there can be a lot of dispute there, and I completely agree. I would note, just for awareness, that making payments is a little bit more complicated than it seems. There just is more manual stuff you have to do. You can't put something on auto pay like you do at your own house. But again, that's no excuse. This is a place that we have to and need to be doing better. So I think 2 pieces here that are relevant. Maybe 3. One is just a prioritization of this, because to the extent it wasn't a priority, it clearly needs to be. 2 is streamlining our processes for efficiency. For example, the clock is ticking, and if the bill comes to the office but doesn't go to the right place immediately, that's days that you can lose that we shouldn't be losing. And so improving our processes to speed things up here is also something we're finding helpful. And finally, we have, as I mentioned, brought on more finance staff. So there just are more people in the office capable of doing the work to get this done on time. Because I don't think there should be excuses here. I don't want to minimize that. That's just a place the office needs to do better. Finding 9 had to do with inaccurate reimbursements to employees and to payments to vendors. This is 2 categories. One is this issue of the airplanes that I know folks talked about a little bit already, so I don't need to spend a ton of time on it. I mean, the answer is that, first of all, this shouldn't have happened. Would agree wholeheartedly. MnDOT sent the office duplicative bills, but that came with different invoice numbers. It wasn't just a photocopy of a thing. But should we have caught it? Yes. No question. MnDOT should have caught this. Like, many people should have caught this, including our own staff. So neither the governor's office nor MnDOT realized the error, and the second we did, we got that reimbursed. This is a case where we paid the bills too fast. But again, was a discrete, specific problem for a few years ago. This is not a ongoing, continuing issue that we're facing. The other piece has to do with employee expense reimbursements. And as I think folks earlier noted, this is one that went in both directions. There were a handful of folks we overpaid, a handful of folks we underpaid. The net to our office was something like $15. But the point is well taken that the amount isn't the reason why this is a problem. It's that there are errors in what we're doing, and that's a problem. So that is in no small part, I think, because the process was a manual process. Again, this involves an Excel spreadsheet and doing the math and attaching receipts that way. And actually today, later this afternoon, we are rolling out electronic business expense reimbursement to all the staff in our office. That's much more common across agencies. We're kind of just getting on board with what a lot of the rest of the enterprise does. The governor's office has never done it that way, but this is a place where I'd say I'm grateful to the auditor for providing that push to make these changes and modernize our systems to bring them into, the appropriate century here. Finding 10 has to do with documentation to support employee reimbursements, vendor payments, and purchasing card transactions. So actually, a couple of things I'd like to talk through here. One is that there's an error in our response letter, and I've already flagged this for Auditor Randall. There should be a corrected copy soon, but we noted that we resolved this in 2023. I think we started making steps in 23, but that's not accurate, and that should say 25. I do consider it resolved. I think we have fixed it, but I just wanted to flag that I think 23 is an overstatement, and we're in the process of correcting that report. So this, I would talk about here, number one, employee travel. That's one of the places where this comes up. Out-of-state travel is relatively rare in our office and would usually mean, somebody going to a policy conference out of state, maybe. And the auditor's team is correct. That requires written approval from a supervisor, and there were examples where we didn't have that. And so that's a place very clearly that we can and have done improved training for all staff, number one, but also have improved the tracking in the operations department itself, so that when they see a request come for a plane ticket, for example, or a hotel, they can say, well, look, your paperwork's not in order. No money's going out the door until you get this in line. And so that's kind of a two-part piece for out-of-state travel. For in-state travel, which I think is the majority of these pieces, and frankly happens a lot more rarely for folks in our office, what I understand is that we follow MMB policy, which requires verbal approval for in-state travel, but not written approval. And I think the reason for that, I don't want to speak for MMB, but I think the reason for that is sometimes in-state travel happens without a lot of warning. You can imagine a train derailment and folks go out there quickly to see what's happening, to support the governor, to kind of take stock of what's on the ground. And you might not have written approval from your supervisor in advance. And MMB policy allows for that and says, as long as your supervisor has given you verbal approval, that's acceptable. So that's, I think, a little bit of a difference between where we and the auditor landed. Purchasing cards, I think folks have talked through this here, and rightly so, to note that the purchasing cards should it's ridiculous that these don't always come with the receipts and documentation that they need, and they should. And so this is also a place where we have implemented improved software to automate more of this, so that there just is less human error and people not losing receipts that they ought to have, because this is serious business. And so for employee purchasing cards, we have implemented the use of DocuSign in our office. And I don't know if you've used that program. We used it when I did my mortgage, but it keeps track of your receipts. It keeps track of signatures. And I think even most relevantly, it keeps track of what you don't have yet. And so to your point that, some of these things shouldn't get paid if you don't have the right documentation, DocuSign, I think, is going to help us make sure that that stuff doesn't slip by without having all of the I's dotted and the T's crossed and all the paperwork you need to have all in one spot with all the approvals you need. So we have taken that step and have rolled it out, I'd say a few weeks ago, maybe a few months ago. I could get to that, the specific date if that's interesting. And finally, the other piece of this had to do with, I'm trying to think about how it was framed, but that there wasn't documentation to support the fact that services or items were received when they were. And the vast majority of these had to do with items that were purchased. And I think this is, again, a place there was a difference of opinion, and we have come into compliance with the OLA's suggestion. I think what the operations team would have said to you is that, well, we know if we bought a table, we know that was ordered because we have it, here it is. And we didn't keep the packing slip from when the table was delivered. Fair or not, but what we have done now is done a better job of that. So when the table is delivered, we keep the packing slip, we keep the invoice that goes in the file. And so all of those purchases for goods or services are just better documented than they were. That's a place that we had not been going that extra mile, and we are now, and I think that's a better practice for our office. Appreciate your patience. I'm very nearly done. Finding 11 had to do with purchasing card policies. This again, largely, I think, is almost like a stub finding from the 2022 audit. We had 3 people in 2022 who were out of compliance, who had not signed a purchasing card agreement in the time period in which they were supposed to have signed one. They did eventually come into compliance. I think it's worth noting that everyone in our office who has a purchasing card, has signed the agreement, is in compliance. This is, again, not an ongoing problem. But I think the auditor's team took issue with the fact that those 3 people who were out of compliance took a couple of months in 2022 to come back into compliance and get that signed. Our view is, we moved expeditiously on that. I think it's fair. Did we move expeditiously enough? I think the auditor's team would say no. And that's fine. I'm not going to quibble with that. But I think it's just worth noting this is not an ongoing problem where people fail to have these signed agreements. This is a holdover and a question of when in 2022 should this have been fixed? But there's no question that it was fixed, that we take it seriously, and that we have remedied this issue. Finally, finding 12 has to do with split purchasing card purchases. There are 2 instances of this, and in one in 2022, one in 2023. Again, not an ongoing issue, kind of a discrete issue in time and space, but one that is unacceptable, and that we've taken steps to fix here too. So here we have dealt with this again by improved office training, which I know I keep repeating, but I think is key to, Madam Chair, your point before, and also with an improved purchasing card policy that just makes more explicit that this is not an acceptable way of structuring purchases. So again, there's no question about whether or not the purchases themselves were appropriate or accurate or improper. It had to do with the method of procurement, which wasn't appropriate and has since been remedied. So I know that was a lot, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to go through it, because we do take this seriously. We've really thought about all of these findings, and I would stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. V. We really do appreciate your attention. Unlike during the period covered, I really do appreciate your attention to detail today in responding to the findings of the OLA. And 2 people have asked to speak again. We'll start with Representative Cleaborn.
Madam Chair, since I'm a guest to the committee, I think committee members should go first. Should I defer to committee members first?
No.
Okay, perfect. I'm a guest. I just wanted to make
Go
sure.
right ahead.
Please. All right. One, I want to thank you for taking the modernization dollars that were allocated to your office in 2023 by the state government budget to good use, and putting in these electronic systems and getting away from the more antiquated systems that, of course, open us up to human error, right? This is a double check. So I appreciate that. I also wanted to remind the committee members that the governor's residence is a 2-part building, right? It is a state office building that different agencies use for different times. And so that's something we always need to keep in mind. It's not just, quote, a mansion. It is a working, functional state office building. The other piece I wanted to remind members in the public is that for a period of this audit, that building was not functional. It was undergoing renovation. All of the files and documents would have been packed up, moved, put into storage. So I just want the public to know that that actually took place during this audit period as well. Some of the things that I would like from the governor's team is, when you talk about these findings as isolated to previous years, What do you think are the more current issues that your office needs to be focused on?
Ms. Fee?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the commission. What I would say is I think about these as about half and half. I think about half of these things were kind of one-time issues or kind of holdovers from a prior audit that were resolved. And in fact, I think were resolved before, largely resolved before this audit even came into being. And so those ones, again, I don't want to minimize them. I want to take them seriously, but I don't think of as ongoing issues. I do think that the auditor raised a number of good questions, though. I think in particular, late bills come to mind as an ongoing issue. We're going to have bills forever. And that's a place that we need to be really thoughtful and timely. And the other place is reimbursements and expense paid. So I'm thinking about this really as money in, money out. Those are things that are going to keep happening through the end of this administration and in every governor's administration after that. And I think we can set ourselves better up for success. In particular, the more we take human error out of this, or have, you know, automatic safeguards that say, yeah, you have not uploaded the right receipt. This process stops until your paperwork is in the computer. And I think we're on our way to getting there.
Madam Chair.
Representative Claiborne.
Thank you. One of your answers that you gave earlier just gave me a little bit of pause, right? So when you are training individuals, right, you have to give individuals time to make the human judgment of, should this be paid right now, right? You can be expedient and incorrect, right? Like you talked about with the airline payments or the airplane payments. So I want to make sure that in our desire to do things quickly and to hit a 30-day payment window, right? Because remember, it's 30 days after invoice received. I think that's the statutory language, that we aren't rushing to payment and maybe not putting the pause to say, we need this time. And I think the auditor is correct to look at the number of days and say, okay, what's justified, what's not justified, but to just hit a certain number might be an error. Let's see. The other thing I think it's really important for us to talk about this is when we're looking at these dollars. Many of these dollars are going from the governor's office to a state agency, right? So, you know, when is it appropriate to say to a state agency, we're going to have you wait for payment to make sure that the documentation is correct? Because it's money staying within the state coffers, right? And then making sure that the priority is where we can reap the value, maybe those rebates that are coming from outside groups. Okay, that's a value we might want to get. So we just want to make sure that we're looking at that carefully. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there was anything else. And you've walked through the steps that you're taking. And oh, one other thing. In the 2023-2024 state government budget, which I took a great deal of heat over, we did fund additional staffing for the governor's office. Can you just kind of walk through how that staffing has maybe helped improve the processes that you're talking about today? Thank you.
Ms. Fee?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the commission. I appreciate that. And I've taken note of this, and I think you're absolutely right that, you know, the number one thing for our office needs to be accuracy. And then I think avoiding unnecessary delay. But I think you're absolutely right on that. And I've taken notes on that to bring back. As to staffing, I appreciate that question. So originally our office operations team was 3 people. And that I think is just woefully insufficient for what kind of both the magnitude of expenses and the quality of work that we should expect from the governor's office of all places. And so in the interim, we have brought on an office coordinator. We've brought on someone to help with HR payments. And then most recently, I'm going to get the title wrong. And so I'm happy to give you more specific titles when I'm not doing it off the top of my head, but a more senior finance person with expertise in accounting. That's in addition to the folks we already had helping manage HR and finance. So I think those additions, which are really high quality folks who take their work really seriously, have been a great asset to our office.
Thank you. Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to go back to finding number 7, and I think you heard me ask the questions, and I'm concerned about missing stuff. And particularly concerned if that is data, if there's missing servers or backup servers or personal information or correspondence. And so, the auditor said it was items and things. So could you maybe help us out on just what that was, or and if you don't have it now, to get back to us, because that worries me a bit.
Ms. Fee.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the commission. So what I don't want to speak out of turn and I don't want to get something wrong. But I do think, at least what I do know off the top of my head, and I'm opening the report just to see if there's any other pieces here. I know some of the issues had to do with the like not an online, but the enterprise asset tracking system that was not particularly used by our office and is not a required system to use, but is an optional one that might be effective. I know that one of these systems contained items from prior administrations. I think there were computers from the Pawlenty era that were still present in there. I think there were laptops from Governor Dayton's administration that were still in there. And our office does not have any of those items. To your question about, are there things missing that are concerning or you're worried about, is there data missing? Are there servers missing? I'm not aware of anything like that, but what I'd love to do is come back to you with kind of the specific list, and I can do that in coordination with the auditor.
Madam Chair, I think that would be real helpful because, we've spent so much time on records retention, data management, trying to protect that information, that if we can provide that assurance. I think just a general comment that, Minnesotans expect good government. That's just a basic thing. And, here you're hearing bipartisan concern about this. I guess I'd look on the bright side that we're not debating the demolishing of the east wing of the governor's residence. We're talking about details. But I've said this over the years at these meetings, you have to sweat the small stuff. We have to sweat the small stuff. And that we also can't manage by audit. We can't wait till the audit comes and then correct something. So it has to be an ongoing effort. And I think that's an expectation that Minnesotans have. So I would feel better if this was the first audit, but I also recognize that and thank Chair Cleavorn for putting dollars in there to help on this, but it takes effort. And so I would ask that you sweat the small stuff, because that's what our expectation is in Minnesota. That's what we expect as good government. And so making it work for everybody and making sure it's transparent is the standard, not exceeding the standard. That's the standard, making it work and making sure it's defensible. So thank you.
Representative Jacob.
Thank you, Chair Rest. So you started out by making a statement. You dealt with the issues the second that that you became aware of them. I assume you must be talking the second you became aware of them this time, because you were also made aware of these findings years ago under the previous audit. And for some reason, this seems like a priority now, but it didn't when 4 of the 5 priority issues were not resolved. So my specific question to you is, as a representative, what should I be telling my constituents when they inevitably make a parallel between the words pervasive and ongoing neglect of resolving the auditor's concerns with the current rampant fraud that's going on in this administration?
Ms. Fee, response.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the commission. I appreciate the question. And I think the key takeaway is, I would echo what Auditor Randall said, which is that this is not a case of fraud, that the team, I think did a really thorough audit and didn't find issues of fraud, didn't find issues of mismanagement, and didn't find improper actions by any governor's office employee. That said, I think we should be held to a high standard, and I think we're trying to achieve that.
Thank you. Senator Coran?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Ms. Lee, I think the piece that's missing, and I'll start out with this question is, right, there's no nefarious actions that are obvious because the receipts are missing to be able to prove anything one way or another on a variety of these things. One question was brought up earlier. Are you aware of if the office is unable to meet any of the legislative auditor's requests during the audit because of the construction at the governor's residence?
Ms. Fee?
Madam Chair, members of the commission, I don't know how that I could answer that question one way or the other right now.
Madam Chair?
Senator Coran, would you clarify the question I'm trying to
The
understand?
question is, there was a statement that information or receipts may not be available for activities at the governor's mansion because it was under construction by Representative Cleburne. And so I wanted to know, has any of that information, was there information that was not available and that was included in this report that was as unavailable? I don't believe there's anything in here that was not unavailable because of the construction of the cap.
What was the
Senator-
period of time when and I'm assuming that when we're talking about the governor's residence, we're not talking about the period of time that the governor and his family either resided elsewhere or resided at East Cliff. What was the period of time that the governor's residence on Summit Avenue was inaccessible to any events? Ms. Fee?
Madam Chair and members of the commission, that is not something I know off the top of my head, but I can certainly find out and come back to you.
Representative Cleburne, do you know?
I do. So it was 2024, late 2023, 2024. I want to make sure that the statement that I made is clarified.
Okay,
The
yes, please do.
statement I made was that at the period of time, so this is an audit of the governor's office, right? Which is separate and from the governor's residence. The statement I made is that some documents that would have been used in this audit, and the audit was this year from January through September, I believe is correct. The period of time for the audit is 2020, the third, or how was this go?
Keep
month
in
prior-
mind the statement made by the Auditor Randall
Mhm.
at the beginning,
Right.
that these audits of the constitutional officers occur every 3 years. There was increased sensitivity
Right.
to not having one of these audits released just prior to a general election of the constitutional officers. So this particular audit is a shorter period of time, I believe, than ordinarily, and it's like 2.5 years. Now, or certainly not this third year, not a routine third year audit. Now, I see, I wonder for a moment, Auditor Randall, if you would join Ms. Fee and the governor's person. Because this is obviously a question that she's not able to answer. Ms. Randall.
The documents.
In response.
Madam
to,
Chair, can I restate the
yeah,
question?
Yeah, in
So-
response to Senator
Thank you.
Rand's, because I think all of us are a bit confused.
Oh,
Or at least
I think
I
that-
am
I
about
think,
what
Madam-
period it was and what's available. in
Madam
this
Chair,
audit.
I don't think the period matters
Okay.
from the construction perspective, but it was implied that information may have been reported as receipts not available because of the construction. And I
That's
didn't
not
hear
what I
that or see that. And you just confirmed it again in any part of the,
Just a minute, Representative
accessibility, in any part of the accessibility of the ability for the legislative auditor to do their work.
You see,
And
That's not
so
what I said.
the construction period, we understand the building's a commercial building. We understand there's mixed use residency, governmental and non-governmental. And so I don't think there's any clarity, and I haven't heard, and that's what I'd like to confirm with Ms. Randall. Was there any information that was unavailable throughout this audit because of the construction at the governor's residence?
Auditor Randall, then I'll come back to Representative Cleaborn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Senator Coran. No, there wasn't information unavailable because of the construction at the residence.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And Madam,
okay,
I
go
do
right
have,
ahead, Senator Coran.
thank you, Madam Chair, and I do have a couple other, Ms. Lee, on the one event, and I appreciate the response and all of those things. We always appreciate the lack of hostility. It's technology will never replace these things. It's really good business practices, and Representative Hansen laid it out. We expect, it's not an extraordinary effort. The standard is to do everybody's job as expected every time. And so with that, the one thing that to me in the gray area is the missing records of the governor's, the use of the governor's mansion or the private residency for non-political or for governmental entities where we've missed 7 of the payments rectified after the audit. But who do we request who do we request, either you or is it the governor's council, the residence council, of who contracted for those services, the negotiated price, and who actually made the payments? It's a public facility. Do we make that directly through your office? And if so, we'd like to do that right now. I'm sure everybody on the committee would appreciate it because we need that transparency instead of bring it up and say, well, we don't know what it was, that these were somehow mistaken and not billed when there were actual political activities related to the governor and the lieutenant governor. Is that a request that we formally make through your office, Ms. Lee?
Ms. Fee?
Madam Chair and members of the commission, I'll repeat back, I think then you can let me know if I got it right or not. I think you're asking if we can provide the kind of the contracts or invoices coming out of these events at the residence?
Madam Chair?
Senator Coran.
Yes, Ms. Lee. Who contracted? Who signed? It sounds like there weren't contracts, but who was the agreement with? What was the agreed amount for? And who made the payment? That's it.
I believe it. I'm in the course of this discussion today, I had asked that question as well, and about who signed the contracts for the use of the building that houses the governor's residence. And Ms. Lyson indicated that it was a member of the governor's residence council that signed those contracts. Maybe I misunderstood. Ms. Lyson? Or Auditor Randall?
Madam Chair, thank you. It was governor's residence staff. I don't know whether it was council, but it was staff from the governor's residence.
And Madam Chair, what I'm looking for
Senator
are those agreements, right? What are those agreements? And who are they with? What was the agreed dollar amount? And then who actually made the payment? That's all. I would like that. And if it's not directed towards the governor's office, which oversees the residents as well, I'll make that request directly then to the residents. I just like some guidance.
Senator Coran, we'll make that request
Okay.
of the auditor to get that information from the governor's staff rather than the governor's staff reporting directly to us. It's more appropriate for Ms. Fee for you to provide that information to the Auditor Randall, and she in turn can inform the members of the.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just have one quick follow-up.
Go right
And so this is following up to Representative Quam had made a statement about the missing receipts for the vendor payments. But I think he said, and I think he said that the vendors weren't providing, just seeking clarity. Do we have vendors that were not providing invoices and they subsequently then were not available, or were they provided and they just weren't retained or available at the time they were requested by the OLA?
Ms. Fee?
Madam Chair, members of the commission, frankly, I don't know the answer to that question, and I suspect it differs by vendor. Though I don't want to diminish the fact, I think there were times when we probably received paperwork and didn't keep it. So, I don't want to blame this all on vendors. Could that have happened? Yes. But also, did we make errors here? Yes.
Madam Chair.
So
And appreciate it, Ms. Lee. And I can understand, there's so many things that are kind of online or autopilot, whether they're available, right? They're likely were available. It's a matter of I find it hard that a vendor would refuse to provide a receipt. And so it was kind of implied that they refused, and we may not have it or received it, but okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm disappointed Representative Jacob left because I wanted to answer his question, which I think was an important distinction. And as somebody who sits on the House Fraud Prevention and Government Oversight Committee, I think that the distinction and what the conversation you and we should be having with our colleagues is what we are seeing as we look at the business model of fraud is private for-profit providers that have made government the mark. And we are seeing that in Medicare. We're seeing that in Medicaid. We see that with providers as big as United Healthcare, New Way, all the way down to individual providers. And one of the reasons we're seeing that is because of this outsourcing of these provisions where we don't have the same kind of oversight that we do here. So the individual granular audit that we have seen and the granular response is actually the kind of transparency that we need, and we need to see the administration in this context working on those documentation and paperwork errors. But that is different in both kind and in the response, because when we look at what the Medicaid fraud problem that not just Minnesota has, but all 50 states have, it is creating a model that is more publicly accountable and publicly transparent in exactly the same way that this is. And so the for-profit issue is not an issue here. The issue of private provider fraud is not an issue here. I think it is an important distinction because as legislators and as lawmakers, we need to really address and are addressing the issue of private provider fraud. That is different here. Then we need to make sure that as you walk through those 12 recommendations, that the office paperwork issues and the personnel issues are all going the way that we want them to go. And also, and I think to Chair Cleveland's point, we have a responsibility as legislature too to make sure that we're providing the infrastructure, both the oversight, but also the resources to do the kinds of things like desegregating, or however we talk about it, duties, because that is as much of an issue of infrastructure and personnel as it is a management issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Greenman, Representative Anderson, and then we're going to wrap up. And I really do appreciate the attention, and but we need to take an action on something. So please don't anybody else leave, and nobody asked for a quorum. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted, first, I agree with a lot of what Representative Greenman just said about the business model of fraud and what's been happening. But it's two parts. It's that, and then it is the management of the state government management of these programs. And it's very simple. It's it's making sure we have documentation. The problems we've seen across state government have been due to a lack of internal controls. They've been due to poor management by agencies. And what's concerning is that we see this in the governor's office. In fact, this audit is worse than some of the agency audits that we've seen. And the governor's office is responsible for all the agencies. And then they're responsible for making sure that all of the financials are followed. They're responsible for OMB. And when you see the governor's office themselves, who's responsible, not following basic financial protocol, then it makes sense why we have issues within the agency. So we've got to do both. We've got to clean it up quick. And so I hope that the governor's office is going to change its tune and then 2 years from now, when we look back at the current year, when we do an audit, it's going to be clean. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Anderson, and thank you, Ms. Fee, for your directness and your transparency in acknowledging the responsibility of the governor's office, not only moving forward, but the responsibility of taking the corrective actions that you have, and that you did that in the midst of the audit, as well as putting into place better technology with regard to employees' records. That is something that we need to make sure that the employees are treated fairly, responsibly, not overpaid, but are not underpaid for the work that they do for the people of Minnesota, and we appreciate that. The business that we have in front of us is approval of the minutes from October 14th. Representative Hansen moves approval of the minutes. Are there corrections or omissions that need to be corrected or additions? Seeing none, the minutes stand approved as presented. Auditor Randall, do you have any comments about future reports that we're should be anticipating for the end of the year?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. Yes, thank you. Next week, we will be releasing a report on the statewide use of overtime and shift bonuses. We'll be releasing that to the audit subcommittee next Wednesday, is what I want to say. And then we will have, we still have several other reports that will be coming, looking at Minnesota State payroll, faculty payroll, looking at DNR's oversight of legacy money, and looking at the Department of Human Services Behavioral Health Administration grants oversight. So we still have those three coming yet later this year is our hope. And then, of course, we are still working on our program evaluations and looking towards having another evaluation subcommittee meeting to continue with our topic selection process.
I believe, Randall, that is next week, and it would be followed by, or within the next several days, I'll say. I don't have my calendar in front of me. And that would be that report from Senator Dibble's Program Evaluation Subcommittee will then immediately be taken up by a what one hope would be a very short meeting of the full LAC to endorse and improve the additional topics for program evaluation. There being no further business before the commission, we're adjourned.